What's going on, everyone? This is the Rayquaza here. Are you having a bit of a struggle in the Pokemon Regulation G format? Are there specific restricted legendary teams that your team constantly struggles against? Or do you find it difficult in terms of selecting your final Pokemon to fully round out your team? Well, this video is to help you choose some very niche, non-restricted Pokemon to help round out your team to build more success in the Regulation G format. So let's hop into it. Okay, so what I was alluding to is, let's say, for example, if you already have a team built, and let's say it's, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 Pokemon in total. As we all know, there are no perfect team because there's always going to be some counter out there. Now, the challenge that comes to play, or something that can be extremely frustrating, is that if you build a team and you have, let's say, for example, a counter of Zacian, and then you go to a regional, and every single team you end up facing is a Zacian team. Now, that is more so unlikely because Zacian's not necessarily one of the very top tier Pokemon, but nonetheless, it is still kind of high up there in terms of ranking. So then you will end up having to deal with a few of them, and you want to make sure that your team can face off against it. So with that being said, you want to make sure that your team is going to not have as many counterplays as possible, especially against some of the high-ranking restricted legendary Pokemon. And you might say, what are these high-tier restricted legendary Pokemon? Well, what I would have to say about that is you may want to go over to the Card Shark Dojo YouTube page, because that is where Ric Flair McNair and I have actually done a ranking of all the restricted legendary Pokemon in this regulation format, and a lot of the recent tournaments have actually been following along the path of how we've broken down those restricted legendaries. So with that being said, I'm going to insert that promo right here, right now. But first, thank you for coming and watching this video here today. If you do like this content, be sure to hit the like, share, subscribe, and have those notifications turned on so you can see when the next videos go live. Also, a lot of you know that I do play the Pokemon video game competitively. On this channel, you may see some of the fun builds and things like that, but if you are really looking towards trying to build your game on the competitive level, be sure to hop over to the Card Shark Dojo YouTube page. Over there, I team up with Ric Flair McNair as we focus currently on the Pokemon franchise, both in the VGC as well as the TCG. There we have discussions of the competitive format, different strong teams, and how we can build teams of our own to work in the competitive format. So if you're looking to up your game to that competitive level, be sure to hop on over there and hit the like, share, subscribe, and have those notifications turned on, because without you, we won't make it. So once again, thank you for being here. And now back to the video. So I hope you've already gone over to the Card Shark Dojo YouTube page and made sure that you are already subscribed and have those notifications turned on for when those videos go live. And I do hope that you are checking out our RGT series, in which we are going through each individual restricted legendary as we have ranked them. So make sure you are checking out that playlist, because even the very first video of that series is us doing the full breakdown. So what we're going to do here, as the tournaments, like I said, have been going along with our ranking overall with how the teams have been placing, we're going to discuss some unrestricted Pokemon that you can add to your team to help counter some of these big restricted Pokemon. So you may, for example, like right now we have on screen here is the Calyrex Shadow. You may want to say that the counter to your Calyrex Shadow team is going to be a Terapagos team, because that's basically correct, because the Terapagos itself naturally will be immune to your Astral Barrage. So you will then have to have a Pokemon on your team that can handle the Terapagos aside from your Calyrex Shadow, while trying to make sure that you don't waste your Terastallization before it starts going ham with its Terra Starstorm, and then next you know, doing super effective damage. So that's basically what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be looking at the restricted legendary, and if that Pokemon ends up being your counter, for example, we're saying, hey, let's say your counter is a Calyrex Shadow, and you're like, oh, I don't really know how to handle this Pokemon. And let's say in your practice, you're realizing, hey, I'm only really using like 5 of my Pokemon each time. Well, then what we're going to be talking about here is the 6th Pokemon that you could basically add to your team to where you can say, okay, I can now counter this Pokemon because I have this one on my team. And the biggest caveat with it is that this is without any terrestrialization. This may only be where you may have like one item on your Pokemon or something of the sort, but this is without terrestrialization, because the biggest key with this is that you want your opponent to use their resource by utilizing their terrestrialization as early as possible. Once that is out of the way, then you can then capitalize on the rest of their team with knowing that their ace up their sleeve has already been removed. So that's going to be the key here. Hope that makes sense. And also, like, let's say if this is even where you're first starting off and you're wanting to say, hey, who do I definitely need on the team? Let's say you choose a restricted legendary, say, hey, I want this particular one. Once again, let's say we want to have a Calyrex Shadow. Then you say, okay, well, then therefore I need to make sure I have like an Urshifu on my team, because I need to make sure I have a counter for that of a Terapagos. And so therefore you already now have 2 Pokemon added onto your team. So that's 1/3 of your team already decided at that point in time. Then you'd go through your EV spreads and everything like that, but that's also going to be on Card Shark Dojo. So that's where you're going for that. But this is just going to be on the foundation level, where I'm just trying to get some ideas out to you, because as you all have seen, I've been doing my videos of the Roulette series, and where I am basically building these teams and I'm trying to make them as competitive as possible, even though the Roulette has been giving me some really bad luck on the Pokemon that I have to use. But nonetheless, we still find some victory because we know which Pokemon that we need to add to our team to handle certain restricted legendaries. And that is without utilizing our restricted legendary spot. So therefore we have our counters already built into our teams. And that's why I'm making this video, to try to make sure that it can provide some assistance to you all, so you can go ahead and build those counters into your team. So if you do like this type of content and you find it helpful, be sure to leave a like, share, subscribe, and turn on those notifications so you can see when the next videos come out. Let's take a look at a Calyrex Shadow opponent. So this is basically, let's saying that you are running a team and the Calyrex Shadow just seems to be giving you a lot of trouble. So if you're noticing that you're only using like 5 of your Pokemon, or if one of the Pokemon is just not doing well or providing the proper support, which Pokemon would you probably want to add to your team to help counter that of a Calyrex Shadow? One of the top ones that I would actually go with is going to be the Urshifu Dark. Now you may want to say, oh, but what about if they're going for their Draining Kiss, or if they're going to be Terra Fairy? Well, yes, that can definitely be a thing, but the biggest key with that is that you're forcing their terrestrialization pretty early, and you're going to be able to capitalize on that with your attacks. Because with the Wicked Blow, or you could even run a, like, let's say for example, if you can actually get it paralyzed, depending on how your team is built or who you actually have on your team, you can switch it up between going on a Wicked Blow or a Poison Jab. They won't be able to protect in front of you, and if you are truly expecting them to go for that terrestrialization right away, you can decide that, hey, I'm going to be Choice Scarf, and I can even go for a Poison Jab and just go straight through it. And let's say if they're going for the Astral Barrage, Urshifu Dark is going to resist that. So Urshifu Dark is going to be a very key to taking out an opposing Calyrex Shadow, and also it provides great support for your team because it breaks through any protect on the opponents, and therefore you can do massive damage. Then we also have the Ursaluna, and typically it's going to be more so on the Ursaluna Blood Moon, because the Ursaluna regular is going to just be able to do like, yeah, it's ground attacks, so you only have that. But if you try to go for a Facade, you're just going to go straight through it. But with the Ursaluna Blood Moon, with the Mind's Eye ability, you can hit it with your normal type moves, so therefore you can go for your Hyper Voice, you can go for a Blood Moon. So regardless if it terrestrializes or not, you're able to hit that Calyrex Shadow. The biggest thing with that is that if you use your own terrestrialization, then you can get hit with the Astral Barrage. But again, this is with us not utilizing our terrestrializations, so we're trying to either force their terrestrialization, or how can we overcome the opponent without using our Terra. Next up, we also will have the Hisuian Zoroark. So the Hisuian Zoroark specifically is going to be one that will wall out the Calyrex Shadow, because it will not get hit with the Astral Barrages. So we have that normal ghost typing. So it's going to be an amazing typing there, and you can do massive damage with its Bitter Malice attack, because it's going to be 4 times super effective damage if they do not even know if you are the Hisuian Zoroark. Because if you are coming out and you are in the illusion form, they don't know if you are the Hisuian Zoroark or not. So then they can waste a turn turn, go for their Astral Barrage, and then boom, you get them. Or what if you actually had like an Urshifu plus a Hisuian Zoroark, but they don't realize it's a Hisuian Zoroark, so then they have to go for a fake out, but they don't know who to fake out because it's going to go right through the Hisuian Zoroark. But then they also are like, wait, if I protect, but should I protect? So this is where you capitalize on them even having this force to switch. So that's even an idea coming to my own mind. So that's the way how that can actually work, and maybe that can actually help you out there as well. Grimmsnarl is a very huge Pokemon that has been helping me out whenever I'm facing up against a Calyrex Shadow, because with our Prankster ability, we have the Thunder Wave, so we can slow it down for speed control. It will resist those Astral Barrages. It can set up those light screens. So with that light screen, it helps protect the rest of the team. And then also, in addition to that, I also will have the, whoops, that's wrong, Spirit Break. So Spirit Break will also reduce the special attack of the opponent. So if I can hit the Calyrex Shadow, which it doesn't have that much of a even physical defense, you can do great damage there, and once again force it to use its terrestrialization, because they might have to do that. You can set up the light screen, paralyze it, and then extra turns you're like, all right, cool, now I'll start Spirit Breaking you, and then that Calyrex Shadow is just basically shut down. They might have to go for their nasty plots if they're running nasty plot, but at that point, you're not really too worried about it there. A huge counter to it is always going to be Incineroar. So Incineroar, it doesn't even matter if you're even Blaze or Intimidate, that doesn't matter. But they are always going to be afraid of knockoff. The Calyrex Shadow will 90% of the time terrestrialize in front of an Incineroar if they do not switch out, or if they don't have somebody that's faster than the Incineroar to do their own fake out onto your own Incineroar, if that makes much sense. So that's why I've even run into a few, but this was on closed team sheet when they actually had their Incineroar with a Covert Cloak, so therefore they would not get faked out, and they were forcing the opponent to run their terrestrialization, because this will shut down a Calyrex Shadow immediately, probably bring it down to like a Focus Sash if they're running a Focus Sash or not. So that is going to be another key there. And also we have the Galarian Moltres, because with that Berserk ability, you're not going to get one shot from the Astral Barrage, obviously, but even from a Draining Kiss. So then if you have that Fiery Wrath, massive damage, you force them to go into their terrestrialization, and then you're set from there. You also even have Tailwind for more speed control there. So this is how these additions can help out your teammates in terms of handling that specific restricted legendary. So you may even be wondering like, okay, how do I choose which one of these mons based upon what I'm doing? And that would be based upon how the rest of your team is. Like, for example, if you already have an Urshifu Water on your team because you're running a Kyogre team, then at that point you don't want to go there with the Urshifu Dark, so because you can't, but maybe you can fit in the Hisuian Zoroark, or maybe you can go with a Grimmsnarl to just add more defense to your team, you know, or you have the Incineroar if you don't have the Incineroar, but most people have Incineroar on their team. So it just varies on how you want to do that, but these are the Pokemon that you will potentially look into that I find this is going to give you the most value in terms of going against a Calyrex Shadow if you are struggling against that Pokemon. The next restricted legendary that we're going to look and trying to counter is going to be that of the Miraidon. Right off the bat, I'm going to say that we are going to need to utilize that of a Rillaboom, because Rillaboom is just basically a terrain changer. Now we can always say that there's going to be the opportunity to go with like an Indeedee. However, Indeedee is just more so of like the support, and it also can shut down your fake out support if you do have fake out on your team. So I'm not so certain about utilizing that of an Indeedee. However, if you are starting off with a Rillaboom, and usually when you're going against a Miraidon team, you got to actually lead off with the Rillaboom, because they are going to typically lead off with the Miraidon, and then you can go ahead and change your terrain right then and there. You have the ability to pivot out, and also you're not necessarily KOing the opponent, but this is actually just one of the ways where you're shutting down the power of a Miraidon, because Miraidon's not actually that great without its terrain. So you want to preserve your Rillaboom and have that Grassy Surge to just change your terrain immediately, and if you can catch it on proper switch-in, or like let's say if you both lead off with the Pokemon, then at that point you will be able to capitalize on that terrain, and you're already weakening the Miraidon from the very beginning of the match. Usually if I ever have a Rillaboom on my team, if I'm facing off against a Miraidon team, I usually lead off with Rillaboom, and that helps me capitalize on that right away. The next Pokemon here is going to be Iron Treads. Iron Treads is going to be one of those niche picks because you can possibly go for a speed boost on the electric terrain because the Miraidon can actually help boost you, and you can run a different item on this team, and just you don't have to go booster energy, but you might be booster energy depending on your team. But with that, you can actually have a higher speed based upon that, and then just go for massive damage with a ground attack because you are naturally immune to their electric attacks. You also, with your steel typing, you're going to resist the damage from their dazzling gleams because they'll typically run with the dazzling gleam. And even if they want to go with a Draco Meteor or something like that, if you do some investment in your special defense, and you're good to go from there. And with that, you can typically lead off with like an Iron Head or something of the sort, because typically with those teams, you're going to be facing up against like a Whimsicott or something of the sort. So you may want to get rid of the Whimsicott prior to the Miraidon, because the Miraidon is not going to be that much of a concern, and because the Whimsicott also tries to go for those encores and things of that sort, you want to basically get that Whimsicott off the field, and then you can focus on the Miraidon at a later point in time, because the Miraidon is only boosting your power, and the fact that your opponent is bringing that, then you're just basically capitalizing on that and taking advantage of them. And with that being said, then you also have Excadrill, who doesn't actually get a boost from the electric terrain, but it's basically the exact same typing of the Iron Treads. It's just that you're going to basically be one of those like Focus Sash users, or depending on how your team is built. If you hadn't seen my previous video when I had actually ran the Sand team and I used the Excadrill was beautiful, and when I was actually using it there. And my Excadrill was able to, once again, we go with those Iron Heads, and then you also have the high horsepower as well, so you can do massive damage against a Miraidon, and you can, you know, if they go for like a Terra Fairy, then you got the Iron Head. If they go for Terra Electric, then you got the high horsepower. You know, you're basically set from that particular point. Last but not least, this is kind of a niche pick, so I wouldn't necessarily say to go with this. I would say to use a Galarian Weezing if you can. Send it out pretty early on, because with this typing, the Miraidon is not going to be able to set its electric terrain, so it's already going to be weakened. You can also, if you're facing off against, like, let's say a Whimsicott or something like that, you're able to shut down its ability, even with, like, let's say if you're going against a Farigiraf. Therefore, it won't be able to activate its Armor Tail, so depending on your teammate that you'll have, so that will give you some additional support. Now, if they are going to go with those Terra Fairies or Terra Electric, I mean, that's where it kind of can get a bit hazy, but this is also, once again, shutting down those abilities. So without the ability, that Pokemon does in fact become weaker, and that is your chance to capitalize on it as soon as possible before you get one shot, because it can still one shot, especially with those choice spec sets, but these are ways where you can immediately shut down its value with these Pokemon here. Next up, we will have the Calyrex Ice teams that you're going to be going up against. So first and foremost, depending on your team, if you have good special attackers or something of that sort, then you got the Chi-Yu. With the Beads of Ruin, you're lowering everybody's special defense, so if you have some good special attackers, you can capitalize on that. But of course, at the same time, you're weakening your own special defense. But if you're facing off against a Calyrex Ice team, then they're probably running on the physical attack side, so that's probably not going to matter. But with that, you also will be able to go with the Heat Wave, and also with the Dark Pulse or Snarl, either or, but nonetheless, both of these moves are super effective against the Calyrex Ice. With that being said, if you're not choiced, especially in open team sheet, your opponent will be able to see what your item is, so they may go protect if they can see that if you're a choice item. So if you're not choiced, so that's going to be the key, you can then utilize one of the moves, and no matter what, you are forcing that Calyrex Ice to Terrasilize. And with that knowledge that you're saying, hey, I'm about to force them to Terrasilize into a different type, probably going to be fire or something of that sort, then you can make sure that your teammate is going to then target down to capitalize on that weakness if possible. So that's where you got to be having that key there, because of course that Calyrex Ice can possibly go with a close combat, or they can go with a high horsepower. It just depends on what moveset that the people have placed onto that Calyrex Ice, so just keep that in mind there. Similarly, we are going to be looking at the Incineroar, who is always going to be utilizing that Will-O-Wisp. Will-O-Wisp is going to shut down a Calyrex Ice. So in these situations, you are going to be able to force the terrestrialization on the Calyrex, because most of the time, especially if they're going to be a Terra Fire, they're going to Terra into that fire type immediately because they are going to be stressing if they get burned. So this is an excellent way to shut it down, and that's why even sometimes you'll see some Incineroar that's going to be with the Rocky Helmet with like maximum defense. Let's say if the opponent is going to be running along with like the Urshifu Water, there is a way that you can actually survive the Urshifu Water attacks while still going for that Will-O-Wisp and doing chip damage back because of your Rocky Helmet onto that Urshifu Water. So different ways of how to do that. That's still deeper levels. We're not going to be worrying about that right now, but that is something to look into. But that is the way how the Incineroar can capitalize on that. It also runs the taunt, so with the taunt you can shut down a Trick Room if that's what they're expecting to go for, or you even have the knockoff, and if you can get the knockoff done and then pivot out the Incineroar and bring it back in later, you then even further shut down their physical attack power as well. So that's definitely an excellent way to do that there. We also will then look at the Urshifu Water. And now the reason I'm actually selecting to go with the Urshifu Water is because the fact that we have the Surging Strikes, it will give the critical hit damage 3 strikes. It will resist the Glacial Lance naturally, so you don't even have to worry about terrestrializing for that. You also, if you are running this or not, you can run U-turn. Not saying for you to use it, but I'm just saying, like, let's say if you are leading with both an Incineroar and an Urshifu Water together, and you just added this one to your team, and then hey, you're going for that Will-O-Wisp, they go into a Terra Fire, and then you go for the Surging Strikes right at the same time. That is a way that you have just pinned that Calyrex Ice, and then you are capitalizing on that and doing massive damage and taking the victory pretty early in the match there. Another Pokemon here is that we have the Gholdengo. Gholdengo is an excellent key. Once again, you're going to force the Calyrex to terrestrialize because with that Make It Rain, you can do massive damage. You are naturally going to resist the Glacial Lance. Also, if they have a fighting attack, then it's not going to damage you. But now if they do have a ground attack, that's going to hurt. So do have to watch out for that. So that's where you can capitalize on like running a Protect, just depending on if they're going to go for it or if you just want to go for the Make It Rain or however you want to just force them into that terrestrialization. Let's say, for example, if you're running this with a Kyogre team, boom, you got yourself a guaranteed destruction move right there, because if they don't have Wide Guard, you go for that Make It Rain plus like a Water Spout or Origin Pulse or something like that, and they go for Terra Fire just because they're just trying to reduce the damage, but then at that point they're getting shut down right away. So different ways of how the teams can work together, and then you're overcoming the opponent there. Registeel is a very niche Pokemon, depends on your playstyle, and I would say take this one with a grain of salt. Now this is one that can outlast that of a Calyrex Ice, because with the Iron Defense and you also have the Body Press. From there, you're going to be able to, of course, use the leftovers and Protect, and then you're going to be able to shut down that Calyrex Ice and do massive damage there. So with that high defense, you're going to be able to withstand pretty much anything. High special defense as well. You can just maximize your HP and then just be able to tank everything once you get those iron defenses. And also if you have enough support on your team, and that is going to be the key there, because if you're going against other Urshifus, it's going to be doing those critical hits. You're going to need to make sure that you can shut down those Pokemon so they don't destroy your Registeel during the process of setting up. Once you get those setups with those iron defenses, you are set to go, because the only thing that's really going to get into your way really is going to be like Clear Smog, but you can't get Clear Smog because you're a Steel type. So as long as you don't terrestrialize, you are good to go. So that's all you really need. So just think about that. You know, that is an excellent opportunity there, and take advantage of that when you can. The next restricted legendary team that you may be struggling against may be the Zamazenta. Now, if you are in fact struggling against a Zamazenta team, one Pokemon that I would definitely recommend to adding to your team, if you can, is going to be Annihilate. Annihilate with its typing automatically is going to not get hit by those body presses. So if you can, you know, prevent from terrestrializing or anything like that, you won't get hurt by those body presses. With that being said, if they have to continue going for like, what is it, the Behemoth Bash or whatever other move that they got to use, if you can go with the bulk up if you need to, then you are good to go. But if you are also can be a simple Final Gambit, if you want to just do a sacrifice move and do a Choice Scarf Final Gambit, boom, you're good to go with that. But Nonetheless, depending on which set you want to go with, if you want to do the bulk up version and then you have leftovers, then the biggest key with that is that if they start hitting you over time, then you will end up having the Rage Fist, and the Rage Fist is going to just do massive damage, and you can continue getting more recovery. Like, let's say if you're going to be either leftovers and or if you're going to be something like the Drain Punch as well. So automatic recovery right there, you're good to go, not getting hurt by those body presses. Zamazenta is kind of like a straightforward mon, so you're pretty much set at that point. Next Pokemon, once again, another ghost type, is going to be our Chandelure. Chandelure, with this typing here, we are not going to get hurt by the body presses. It's also not going to get really hurt by its like steel attacks as well, that Behemoth Bash or whatever else they want to do. So no matter what, or Heavy Slam, that's the other move that they will typically do. But you're basically set in that regard. So if you can get some good speed control to get yourself faster in it, that will be your biggest key, because who knows what their teammate is going to do. So always got to watch out for those teammates. But with this high base special attack that you would already have, that Heat Wave is going to do massive damage against it. So you're pretty much set there. You're going to force it to do its terrestrialization, and then you can capitalize on that with your teammates. So once they do that terrestrialization, then maybe your Restricted is able to capitalize on that, because they're no longer that Steel fighting type, because Steel is a very defensive typing. So once you can capitalize on that, you're good to go from there. And then another fire type that we're going to have is going to be Chi-Yu once again. Chi-Yu is going to be kind of specific though, because you're probably going to have to typically do the Choice Scarf if you're wanting to do that. Or you can, if you can get some other forms of speed control on your team, then if you want to not have the Choice Scarf and you want to run something like the Protect and maybe like a Focus Sash, I mean, that is also something that you could potentially do, but definitely you're going to have to get that Heat Wave or maybe even an Overheat, you know, one of those moves, do massive damage as quickly as possible to shut down that Zamazenta ASAP before it just basically goes through your Chi-Yu. Now, the other thing is that if you go for the challenge about Chi-Yu is that even if you go for like a terrestrialization, the Heavy Slam will still do a lot of damage to you. So again, this is trying not to use those terrestrializations, just trying to have a good counter, and that will be something that you may want to be very cautious of with using the Chi-Yu, but Chi-Yu can in fact do massive damage if you can outpace it. So that's going to be the biggest key for that. So you got to have the proper support for that Pokemon. We also have the Iron Moth. Now, the reason I would also add the Iron Moth here is because with this typing, you're going to resist the body presses. Yeah, your defense is not that great, but you're still going to do some good resistances. Plus, with if you can just do a standard Booster Energy, because that's the typical item on a lot of these Pokemon. I mean, yeah, you can go for a Focus Sash, but let's just say, going with the Booster Energy, from that point, you can be outspeeding. Once you outspeed, if you go like a Timid, let's say for example, and then you just basically get that booster speed, you're outspeeding that Zamazenta immediately, and very powerful special attack right there. I mean, you don't have to do that much investment. You can still just do it in a certain way to where you can have just so much speed and then still get the booster speed version and still do massive damage on the special attack side. Force their terrestrialization. Again, make them use their resources. That's all you need to do. Because sometimes if your team is just struggling against that Mon because of its typing, and if you can just simply have a Pokemon that can force them out of that typing, then you can capitalize on it from that point forward. So that it could be your very big goal from that point. And finally is going to be its other variant of it. Not, of course, the Paradox variant, but actually what it's based off of. And that's going to be Volcarona. The reason Volcarona, though, is going to be quite different is because of its Flame Body ability. That is going to be the big key, because Zamazenta is going to be doing contact moves. With that being said, it does not want to get burned. If Zamazenta gets burned, its attacks are basically shut down. You have very powerful fiery dances, so you can do massive damage there. You can, depending on what their teammates are, because you got to watch out for Encore, but you can do Quiver Dance, and or you can even go with a Rage Powder, depending on how much defense that you have invested in this Pokemon. But with that being said, if you were to, for example, go Fiery Dance, they terrestrialize into a water type. But what if, just what if, you do have Giga Drain, and then you absorb health, and you're getting that back, and then they're trying to do their body presses, not very effective, and then they are just basically just getting walled out. and then they get burned from their flame body. Boom, you're good to go. See? So, simple Pokemon that you can add to your team, just fitting that in there, depending on who they can replace on your team if you're struggling against a Zamazenta. So, hope that one helps. Alright, now the next restricted legendary that you may be struggling with is a Pokemon that I've always struggled against, but no longer, because now whenever I face it, I am never concerned about it any longer. And that is Terapagos. Now, the main Pokemon that can always counter against the Terapagos is going to be Urshifu. Now, whether you go with the Urshifu Water or the Urshifu Dark will vary, and the main reason for that is depending on how fast you're going to force them to do their terrestrialization. Because typically, 99% of the time going against the Terapagos team, the Terapagos is going to terrestrialize. So that's just it. So if you go with your Urshifu, the challenge is going to be whether or not you are choiced or not. So if you are running a choice item and you can only use one move, that's where things can get a little hairy. Because with the Terapagos having the Terra Shell ability, your first attack that you do to it is going to be weakened. So if you do an attack like close combat and then you are weakening your own defenses, and then you can get knocked out because of that. So you won't have the opportunity to doing a very powerful close combat on the next turn. So the big key would be if you have a teammate that can hit the Terapagos first, break its shell, and if they do terrestrialize, then you're not even worried about it anyway, and then you can do the close combat right then and there. If not, then you're going to have to go along with your other move, and that may be your, whichever is your critical hit move. So with the Urshifu Water, it's going to be the Surging Strikes, which will do 3 hits, and then if it's the Urshifu Dark, then you got to go for the Wicked Blow. Urshifu Rapid Strikes may be a bit more effective because a lot of the Terapagos will go for Substitute. And if they go for the Substitute, then you can do those Surging Strikes, break through the sub, and still do extra damage onto the Terapagos, because once it breaks, you are still continuing on those hits. As opposed to Urshifu Dark, it's not able to do that, so it's only able to get 1 hit out. So that's going to be the key there. However, having the Urshifu with those powerful fighting attacks is going to be massive, and you can get rid of a Terapagos very quickly with that. We also have the Flamigo. Flamigo is going to be extremely great because it has the Wide Guard. You can actually position this Pokemon to where it's just at the end game, and if you can have a teammate that can survive and knock out everything else, and if their Terapagos is the last remaining Pokemon and they can only go for, like, let's say their Terra Starstorm if they're already terrestrialized, then all you have to do is just sit there and go for Wide Guard and let the teammate just do the attacks. That's all you gotta do. And from there, if you even go to timer, if you can just be higher on your time, then you're set to go, because then you have 2 Pokemon remaining, they only have 1, and then you're good to go from there. Other than that, you can still, once again, just go for that close combat. And from boom, you are set. You can do massive damage against that Terapagos there. Excellent damage, bringing it down. You also even have that Tailwind support as well. So these are 3 moves already with that Flamigo that can make it extremely niche. But of course, it's not super defensive, so you do have to watch out for that. So usually this is a Pokemon that will have the Focus Sash, so you're going to have to be very mindful of that type of thing. Next up, we also have the Bastiodon. This is a Pokemon that has been climbing up in the ranks, and this is going to be very similar to like that Registeel that we were talking about there. Once again, we got the Iron Defense. We also have the Body Press. We also have Wide Guard. So right there, you have the 2 moves that basically shuts down the Terapagos. So if they do have Earth Power, yeah, then you got to watch out for that, but you do have Sturdy, so that's excellent there. So with that, you want to make sure that you have good support of your teammates to take out that Terapagos ASAP. Next up, we also have the Iron Hands. Iron Hands is excellent of a Pokemon here, because with that Fake Out, you are able to break their Terra Shell ability. You are then able to go for very powerful Drain Punches, because even without the terrain, this is Iron Hands. This thing hits like a mega truck, okay? It just hits. Then it doesn't matter about your other moves, but with these 2 moves there, you're doing massive damage against the Terapagos. It cannot break away from its weakness to your Drain Punch. And if you can find a way to boost up the power of your Iron Hands, then you are squared away. So that is something to look into. And of course, if you are going to be like the Assault Vest, then you're weakening the damage that's coming from their Terapagos as well. Then finally, we also have the Mienshao. So Mienshao is going to kind of fall into the lines of like the Flamigo, but with the Mienshao, you once again have the Wide Guard. You also will have the Close Combat. And if you are like having like a teammate that you can do something along with like body pressure, something like that, then you can go coaching, you know? So let's say you had both Mienshao and Bastiodon on your team, then the Mienshao can use the Wide Guard while the Bastiodon goes Iron Defense and then goes Body Press. Or you can switch it around and just go Wide Guard here and then you go Close Combat. So it just varies on how you're actually going to run it. But Terapagos is really not that challenging. You just have to know how to position your fighting moves on your team to make sure you can break the shell and get rid of it ASAP. And then if they use their terrestrialization, the rest of their team is just basically going to fall to the wayside because they can't terrestrialize. I have gone against a few people that basically learned not to terrestrialize their Terapagos because it became worthless. So use that to your advantage, because for those that don't know that, capitalize on it, take out that turtle. All right, so we're going to do a couple more mons here. So we're going to look into if you're having trouble going against the Kyogre teams. Now, the challenge about going against the Kyogre teams is identifying what their terrestrialization is going to be. Because there's typically the water types, there's also the grass types, and there's not usually the ghost type, but then there's sometimes it is going to be the ghost type. And that's usually the main ones that are out there. And with that, that makes things very difficult most of the time. But again, we want to force them to go into their terrestrializations. And no one does it any better than Rillaboom. Rillaboom, having that Grassy Surge, and you immediately have the power for that Grassy Glide, you will force that Kyogre to terrestrialize immediately. They may even say, oh, I'm going to swap out to my Farigiraf and then try to do that, ha ha ha, but then you also have the power of the Woodhammer, and then you are set. I mean, that is going to force so many Kyogres to then go for their terrestrializations into grass, especially if that's what they have, but then you have U-turn. And you still do massive damage against that Kyogre. So then there's a lot of those defensive types that also have additional ways to bring health back as they're going for those water spouts. Yes, there are things like that. But again, we are doing pressure. So then, for example, let's say if you are doing this and you're getting that U-turn swapping out, they're trying to get their health back, but they terrestrialize into a grass type, then you send out a fire type that sets up the sun, like a Koraidon or something. Well, no, Koraidon's not a fire type, but I mean, let's say you set up the sun, weaken their water attacks, and then at that point, just go for a heat wave. At that point, they're like, oh crap, I have to swap out. Somebody else is going to take a bunch of damage. And then from there, you're basically setting up the pace for how you're basically capitalizing against that Kyogre. So definitely ways to overcome that. So you also even have the Raging Bolt, once again, that will also force them to terrestrialize, because this thing, if you don't realize it, this thing can hit very hard with those Thunderbolts. You also have speed control with the Electro Web, so you better gotta watch out if they're going for like Trick Room, so be careful with those Electro Webs. And also you gotta watch out for those Thunderclaps, because there are a lot of those things that are preventing the priority moves, so be very mindful of that. But with that being said, you have the ability to cause massive damage there. You can Snarl to reduce their special attack, or you can go with a Dragon Pulse or a Draco Meteor. Just different things that you can actually do to reduce the damage coming from that Kyogre, and you want to do as much damage as possible before it starts setting up on you, if it's going to do that. Next up, we also have the Ogerpon Water, which is the Wellspring. Now, Ogerpon, with its natural ability, if the Kyogre is going to go for any of its water attacks, it's going to absorb it. If they want to start going for their ice attacks, then you're just going to have to just soak up that damage. But you do have that Horn Leech, so you can get some recovery. Once again, you're going to force them into that terrestrialization. You have Ivy Cudgel, which depends on what they terrestrialize into, so that's going to be your stab there. It's going to be your water attack. So if they don't terrestrialize into like grass or water, that's your only chance to really do any good damage. But I mean, nonetheless, they are giving you a water boost as well. So with that rain, maybe you can get a good critical hit from that, possibly, but not necessarily saying that you should go that route. You can, now most people don't do this because they typically will go like the Follow Me and the Spiky Shield, but you can go U-turn if that is going to be your niche move, if that's something that can help you out, if you're going to want to forego like the Follow Me and you just want to keep the Spiky Shield there. So that is another option for the pivoting if you want to damage out a Kyogre, if that is the one Pokemon that is causing you the trouble. If the rest of your team is perfectly fine, this is a way how you can actually then capitalize against that Kyogre that's coming out as well. Next up, we also have the Gastrodon. Gastrodon with that Storm Drain ability. With this is something that you can do like a Terra Fire, for example. And if they go with their Ice Beam attacks, nothing. If they go with their Water Spouts, Origin Pulses, Hydro Pumps, whatever they want to do, it literally doesn't matter. And then from there, you can go Ice Beam if they want to terrestrialize into the Grass type. And then if they want to terrestrialize into water types, then you just keep it up with the earth power. But basically the big thing is just going to do chip damage against them. You can do a yawn, put them to sleep, get somebody else in, and then start controlling the damage against that Kyogre from that point forward. So that's how this Mon would actually work in terms of helping out on the team. And of course you can also just sit there and just go for Recover if need be, depending on what your sets are. And again, this is based upon what your team needs, and if it can fulfill that role, something that can help you out there. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at the Pokemon that can help you out in facing off against those Koraidon teams. So right off the bat, Chandelure is going to be your number one Pokemon that can actually help you against a Koraidon, because with its typing, it's Ghost Fire. In addition to that, with its ability of Flash Fire, that means that Koraidon, which uses, typically it's Terra Fire, but we don't even worry about the terrestrialization at this point, it will run the Flame Charge, Flare Blitz, Collision Course, and Protect, and Holding the Clear Amulet. With all of that, none of its moves can hit a Chandelure. If they use their fire attacks, you boost your own fire attacks in response. If they go for the fighting attacks, it goes right through you. So basically, you can sit there and just simply focus on its teammates, get rid of it, and then say, okay, Koraidon, now what? And if the Koraidon also sets up the sun, it's boosting your own firepower already, and then let you switch in and take a fire attack on top of that. Your fire damage is going to be massive. Absolutely massive. So basically, if you can use this as your ultimate key and ensure that you keep it hidden in the back and get rid of everything else that can support their team that will try to support like the Koraidon, this beautiful Pokemon can come in and counter it completely. So if you've been struggling with Koraidon for some reason, add this Pokemon to your team, because it just completely counters it completely. So that should be able to cover it from there. Next up, similar concept is going to be Ceruledge. So Chandelure is going to be more on the special side, while the Ceruledge is going to be more on the physical side. Ceruledge has the same ability, same typing. It won't be able to be hit by that Koraidon, and then you can then work on its Bitter Blade and just focus on damaging its teammates and getting them off of the field. That's literally all you have to do, and you are squared away from that point forward. So the biggest key in both the Chandelure and the Ceruledge is basically keeping them safe in the background, so then you can target down those teammates or whoever the teammates may be. Usually though, because that is going to be the concept, you are going to be facing off against those Fluttermanes, because Fluttermanes are going to get those boosts. So let's say, for example, you got with the Ceruledge, which helps out there, you got the Shadow Sneak. So you got some priority here that you can do. You want to make sure that you can still have enough recovery or enough sustainability. So let's say you have a teammate that can do some damage onto the Fluttermane. If the Fluttermane manages to survive, you still got that Shadow Sneak, boom, then you're squared away. Or you can do something along the lines of like the Bitter Blade and you get a massive recovery, or you just go for the Shadow Claw. It's just depending on whatever you're going for. Or matter of fact, you can even go for the Bitter Blade just naturally, because you're going to get a ton of recovery because it is a fire attack and it will be in the sunlight as well. So these are things that you're just basically going to be working towards, to where you're getting enough health back or just doing massive damage onto that Fluttermane and then preserving that Ceruledge in the back. That's all you got to do. Then have it come out later on, Koraidon, no problem, you're good to go. So that's basically it. That's all you really got to do for that. And honestly, I don't really have much going against the Koraidon because really the main Pokemon that people can add onto their team more often is one that fully shuts down a Koraidon as well, and that's going to be Pelipper. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but not really anymore because how often Pelipper has been so viable in the VGC format. Because, of course, with the Wide Guard, it's not for, like, Koraidon or anything. But with the Wide Guard, it helps support against other restricted legendaries. But on top of that, you come in, you summon the Rain. Once you summon the Rain, the Koraidon also is not going to be doing much with its collision courses against your typing because you're part flying. If it also goes with those fire attacks, even if they terrestrialize, still not doing much damage, so you're good to go with that. If you have the Rain, that's going to be the key. If you have the Rain and you can catch it before it even terrestrializes, then all you have to do is simply hit it with a Hurricane. You also have Tailwind to make sure that you have that speed control. And then finally, you can use Weather Ball. So if they do terrestrialize, if you force that like earlier on and then you send in the Pelipper after that, then if they're stuck in the fire type for some reason, can't switch out and they can't get the weather back, send in that Pelipper, Weather Ball, you're set. I mean, I would probably go with like a Tailwind just in case and protect my teammate just in case if they somehow manages to survive. But no, I'll just go with that Weather Ball and then boom, we're squared away from there. So that's how you simply can shut down this powerful Pokemon with just somebody just as generic as a Pelipper. So hop onto the water and go catch a Wingull and evolve it, and you're squared away if you're struggling against that Pokemon. And next up is also another Sunsetter is going to be a Groudon. Now, Groudon is also one of those Pokemon that has been climbing up in the ranks in the recent VGC regional tournaments. So with that being said, you want to make sure that you have some Pokemon that can handle a Groudon. Can't believe I'm even telling y'all this because I love Groudon. Groudon's my favorite, and I just like, I'm telling y'all how to destroy a Groudon. But here we go. All right, starting off right off the bat, once again, we have that Pelipper. So now, it's still going to be a bit of a challenge nowadays because a lot of these Groudons are starting to run with those Thunder Punches, so be mindful about that. But without doing a terrestrialization, if your Pelipper can come in, and sometimes you can outspeed them, just depends on how they are doing the investments, then once if you get that Weather Ball, because typically a Groudon is going to be on the Terra Fire side, with that Weather Ball, if you have the Rain, you are squaring yourself away to get rid of that Groudon ASAP. So that is one thing that is beautiful about this Pokemon there. You get that Drizzle, change the weather, boom, you're good to go. Also, you have the Wide Guard. So if, and again, I know we're not really talking about changing our types. This is without using our terrestrialization, so that's going to be the key there. But if you did need the Terra and you were no longer a flying type, and then you can go for the Wide Guard just to protect your team, because if they are going for those Precipice Blades, then you can protect your teammate in order to do the damage onto the Groudon at the same time. You could, for example, even just go with the Wide Guard and have a Focus Sash, even if they are going for a Thunder Punch, survive that hit, go down to your Focus Sash while the teammate is doing the damage onto the Groudon as you may need it to be. Another Mon that we have is going to be the Golduck. Have you all seen the Golduck in a while? Because this Pokemon had run its course back when we had the super primal versions of these restricted legendaries, because Golduck has the Cloud 9 ability. With that, it's going to nullify the sunlight automatically, and so there will be no boost granted on the field as long as Golduck is on the field. And then you can go for a powerful Hydro Pump. You can potentially one-shot it. You also can do the Muddy Water, so that can also do some spread damage, drop their accuracy as well, which will be detrimental for a Groudon. And of course you got Surf, which that can hurt your own teammate, and also you got Chilling Water depending on what item they're holding. You also have Soak that you can get rid of their typing and make them susceptible to electric attacks. Just depends on whether or not they terrestrialize or not, because if they terrestrialize, then I don't believe that Soak will work. But nonetheless, instead of worrying about necessarily niche moves or anything like that, simply having something along the lines of a Muddy Water then that automatically gives you a specific boost there, because with the Cloud9, you're doing massive damage against that Groudon right then and there. Another Pokemon that will be pretty niche, and this is going to be varying based upon when you force them into their terrestrialization, and that is going to be that of the Ogerpon Cornerstone style. Because let's say, for example, because with Groudon, it is going to be a ground type initially. So instead of worrying about going for the Ivy Cudgel immediately, you can go for a Horn Leech. Do some good damage. If they go for their Precipice Blaze, trying to get you down to your sturdy ability, then after that point, in fact, if they are going to get the terrestrialization into a fire type, you got the Ivy Cudgel, you're going to do massive damage into that fire type there. If they are wanting to stay as a ground type, you got the Horn Leech and you get more recovery as well. So this is a great Pokemon that can do very good damage against that of a Groudon and force that terrestrialization, just depending on how you want to do it. I would not recommend doing a Wood Hammer because you will be breaking your own sturdy ability at that particular point. So the only other thing that will help you out is if you were to like terrestrialize and then try to boost your defense. But again, I still won't necessarily really recommend that, because that will still cause you to be using your terrestrialization, which can be useful for somebody else, because you are still going to be weak to those Precipice Blades. So definitely will still be cautious about this one, but there is a specific way of how you have to play it in order to basically outplay that of a Groudon. Then, of course, we have Walking Wake. So if you have a Walking Wake on your team and you have been struggling against that of a Groudon, the Groudon basically is now going to be powering you up, because the simple move that this Pokemon can have is Hydro Steam. And with that Hydro Steam, you can automatically do massive damage against it. You can, with the sunlight, you're doing extra damage. And then even in the rain, extra damage. So if you have a rain team, you're doing massive damage. If they're using the sunlight, boom, you're doing excellent damage, and they're powering you up. So if you have a spot available on your team, and if you want to just go ahead and throw that Walking Wake on there, and that's even without it even necessarily an item. So you can go with like a booster energy and then make it a little bit more helpful in terms of, you know, facing off against other teams. Or if you can do like a Life Orb, and then if they go with their own form of the sunlight, and then it boosts you up, because like with speed, for example, then you can outpace it, do massive damage, probably one-shot it, and you're good to go from there. So Walking Wake is going to be a massive counter to that of the Groudon. So keep that in mind if that is something that you have been struggling against, that you can utilize it and have them boost you. And the last Pokemon that we're going to discuss on this video is going to be Zacian. So once again, going against a Zacian who is going to be a very contact-oriented Pokemon, we are going to once again look at Volcarona. So as you have noticed, that there's some Pokemon that have shown up a couple of times. So those are types of Pokemon that you may want to definitely consider adding to your team if you're struggling with even like a couple of these types of teams. But that's something also to keep in mind to how niche these Pokemon are. But with that being said, Volcarona, having that Flame Body ability, runs the risk of the Zacian getting burned. Also, you have very powerful Heat Waves that you can run, which I know before we were talking about like Fiery Dance, which you can do to boost up your own special attack. You can also even go with the Quiver Dance just to boost up your speed and special defense. Now, a lot of the Zacians have been starting to go with that Terra Ground, so this is one of those situations where you do want to have that Giga Drain available so you can absorb that health back, because it is potentially going to do some massive damage, and that Terra Blast is not going to make any contact. So you also want to make sure you have a Pokemon that can have the Intimidate, just to drop down the attack on that Zacian ASAP, because that is going to be the consideration against the Volcarona, because Volcarona can still get knocked out pretty easily from physical attacks if they don't make contact, and that Terra Blast will definitely do some massive damage there. Another Pokemon that we can talk about is going to be Gyarados. Gyarados is not a Pokemon that you see too often, but when it is used, it's used in a very effective manner, and I think this is a Pokemon that has been slept on, especially if you are in fact struggling against Zacian teams. If you can add a Gyarados to your team, it has the Intimidate ability. It naturally does some good damage on the physical side because it does have that base 125 on its attack power. So just having the Intimidate in itself is automatically going to give you some massive value. You don't necessarily have to be bringing it against those Miraidon teams, which is going going to have, of course, the Iron Hands and things like that, but nonetheless, you can utilize it just against those Zacian teams to just drop their attacks, and then also you can do some very powerful like waterfall attacks, or if you want to just do some other type of setup, or you can even go with like the Thunder Wave. And think about it also, if they went for like that Terra Ground for some reason on one of your other Pokemon, then you got the powerful waterfall attacks, and then you can take it out. So definitely different ways to where you can have the Gyarados be more supportive and do some very great damage against it as well. Once again, we're also going to be looking at the Chandelure, but this will be a very different kind of Chandelure to where you can go with the Flame Body. But of course, if you did go with a Flame Body version of a Chandelure, that means this Pokemon will not be as effective in going against something like a Koraidon team. So keep that in mind if you went with a Flame Body ability instead. But with that, you will still threaten the Zacian. It will not be able to use its Sacred Sword. Its Play Rough will also be reduced damage because it's not very effective against your typing. And then if it goes for its Behemoth Blade, then it's also not going to do much damage as well because you are in fact a fire type as well. So with that, you can counter it with doing some massive Heat Wave attacks. So that can do some massive damage there. You also have Energy Ball if they are going to be in that Terra Ground format. But once again, because they are going to be potentially that Terra Ground, you're going to have to be very mindful of that because, again, that Terra Ground Terra Blast will knock out the Chandelure, hands down. So you've got to be very mindful of that. You will definitely need some great speed control on your team if you want Chandelure to be your mon to take out that Pokemon, if that helps round out your team. Then we have the Ogerpon Heartflame. Ogerpon Heartflame is going to be very good because with its typing and make the ground attacks, if it went for the Terra Ground, it's going to be neutral damage. Its Sacred Sword is also going to be neutral damage. Play Rough is going to be reduced damage, as well as the Behemoth Blade is also going to be reduced damage as well. And you are threatening a massive KO with that Ivy Cudgel. So if you can get proper speed control, so that's always going to be the key. If you can get proper speed control, you can basically control everything in that field. And then also with a Horn Leech, then you're able to do some massive damage if they do go for the Terra Ground, and then you can get some health back. But the Ivy Cudgel in itself, unless they're Terra Water, is you're going to do some massive damage regardless. So this is something that you can naturally capitalize on as well. Another Pokemon that has not seen much usage because of its alternate form is going to be Landorus Therian. So its incarnate form is more so used, but the Therian form is going to have the Intimidate ability, and that is going to be a way to help shut down the Zacian, especially since it will not be able to get that boost again. In addition to that, it will resist the Sacred Sword, and that's already going to be a very good plus in that regard. Now, the Behemoth Blade is not going to be resisted, and the Play Rough is also not going to be resisted. However, you can change your typing with the Terastallization, but it's not something that you necessarily want to do. You want to have that speed control, and if you can obtain that proper speed control initially, then you can go for some massive damage on the like Stomping Tantrum, for example, or just go for like even Earthquake, depending on who your team is and or whatnot, and just have different ways to where you can do massive damage on that Zacian as soon as possible so you can pick it off later on in the game. Especially if you're running, like, for example, with one of your restricteds, if they can get a boost with a KO or something like that, that'll be something that you can work with and get that set up. So that's just a different way how you can help counter that of a Zacian without even worrying about utilizing that Terastallization. So you can basically keep that for the other Pokemon that you have on your team if you are specifically struggling with that particular restricted legendary. So that's going to be the key there. So I do hope that this has given you all some insights to your team building. There are more restricted legendaries out there, obviously, but these are the most viable restricted legendaries that are making waves as it stands right now. And this video is long enough. So if this is something that you like and you would like for us to do some more of those, be sure to leave a like, share, subscribe, and also leave a comment below. And let me know what you like about it. If I missed any Pokemon that you have used to counter on some of these other Pokemon, or if there's any additional assistance that you need in terms of that team building, you be sure to leave a comment and let me know that as well. But with that being said, this is going to be the Rayquaza signing off. You all know what to do. You stay strong and you always power on. Let me catch y'all later.